Hello again. So our first thing in our space value exploration has to do with just a simple depth of space with overlap. And some of you have kind of run into that with what you're working on, what you were working on with shapes anyway. Anyhow, so first off, I'll talk a little bit about some pencils. And many of you are familiar with your regular, well, this is a 2HB. But your standard kind of sometimes 2B pencils. The B, these numbers tend to stand for the hardness and softness of the graphite in the what we call the lead sometimes. H is the harder, and B is softer. So if you have a, what do we have here? We have a 3H, that would be a harder graphite than a, can't read, 6B. 6B is fairly soft. What that means is it'll make a darker, the 6B will make a darker line than the 3H. So if you want to think about a scale, here's 6B over here, and here's 3H. Yeah, it's probably about there. But anyway, so you can see that, I'm going to mess up the whole thing. Well, if I take the, let's start with that 3B. Whoops, there's a 4B and a 3H. And it's nice to have a variety, although, so if I take like this and shade and lightly press, I'm not trying to create lines like cross-hatching like we did when we were doing some of the line work, but I'm kind of doing that, just gently pressing. Now I can press a little harder and it'll get a little darker, and I can vary that by easing off the pressure, but I can also come back over and kind of, similar to cross-hatching, I guess, kind of shade the other way to kind of blend, build it up a little bit. So kind of going another direction. And then the 6B, if I start it with that same sort of pressure, very light pressure, it's a little bit darker. You can automatically see. It's much easier with a little bit of pressure, and I can also see what's underneath. Make sure there's no stuff underneath your paper when you're shading, because otherwise that will become part of your design. But anyway, so it is much darker. And sometimes if you buy a set of pencils, they'll have these little like chart on the back, like how dark it is. But it's also the amount of pressure and also going back over top of it. So again, this one can get very dark. Now the only problem with graphite is you start to get that reflection. You also will get smudges on your skin and drag it everywhere. There's also ways you can use either another piece of paper to kind of blend them a little bit, or you can, sometimes I end up using my fingers. There's different types of, little piece of cloth you can use to blend as well. But you get a lot of variation with just a few pencils. Okay, you don't need to buy a ridiculous set. A 6B is pretty nice to have because it goes pretty dark. And a 2H, or 4H, with those two you can pretty much do a lot. But anyway, so now back to the problem at hand. The first one was overlap, and this is sort of the idea of depth and overlapping. So we're going to use different types of shapes, and you could, kind of freehand draw things, but I think in my directions I want at least 12 shapes. And you're going to decide on, look at this, it's a penny, what's going to be in your foreground. Actually, let's put that in my foreground. And I will just, I'm going to use, now you could freehand stuff, you could cut out templates. If you want to use the same shape over and over again, you could, trace out something. But I'm just going to use this because I have it. And then say I want to have this overlapping. So a sense of overlapping depth. I'm not going to draw, let's do it this way so you can kind of see. I'm not going to draw these areas here. I'm just going to draw from that edge over. Okay, so I don't draw this one, they're not over, it's behind it. So I'm making my first one, I'm already smudging like crazy. My first one, maybe have clean things, is going to be the one that's going to be in the front. Now I could go back and fix that and change that if I wanted to. And I can add in other shapes. This is going to be harder to do. I don't know why I chose this wobbly thing. So you can kind of play randomly with the idea of what you're doing, just grabbing different things that you might have. And that's hard to see. One of the things that I mention a lot is running out of the picture plane. So when I'm saying that, now sometimes say I'm there, if I go right here to the edge, like I'm still in the picture plane, it borders it nicely, but it's nice for it to break that picture plane because it makes it more like it's moving beyond, it's getting into our space, kind of more involved. It depends on what you're trying to do. There's no, it's not a particular hard and fast rule, but having things move out of the picture plane, like it's flowing beyond this, tends to make it more interesting. So once you get that, you can clean up with the with your eraser. But I'm going to take my 3H and I'm going to kind of go in and shade like there's a shadow. And we're going to do stuff later on where we're looking at a still life. You're going to build a little still life and look at it. Right now we're just sort of inventing and playing with this idea of space. Okay, so that's a light shadow there. Then in some of the darker areas, say if I take that 6B, if I want the background, I would darken that in quite a bit. And in fact, if this was just empty space going all the way back, I would make that sort of the darkest I could get it. So there's sort of a combination, and that would continue on. So fill up some spaces, like I said, at least 12. They don't all have to be the same shape. And you'll build this and kind of go through, and maybe you want this to be a little bit darker over here. Quickly, lightly. So with that darker pencil, I can quickly kind of make a shaded area. And I could even make this whole entire piece. Maybe I wanted this guy here. Not only do I want him to be a sense of depth, and I got some examples on the D2L page. This is just sort of quick. And then the shadow here. So that's farther back in the dark. We can do a better job, Joe. Can always do a better job. Like that was a mess up. Maybe imagine the shadows coming over larger over this piece. Like this is projecting a bigger shadow. So you can experiment a little bit with how just this shallow kind of overlapping and kind of some slight value differences to create shadows and such. Can create a sense of depth of these things building up on top of each other. Okay, so look at the examples. You watch me do this whole thing. Anyway, and the next one after this, we'll get into linear perspective, and then we'll get into that still life stuff. But anyway, for now, focus on just getting this one done and experimenting a little bit with depth and space and value. All right? Take care.